What if the Bible was never meant to be a religious book? What if its earliest stories, creation, the flood, the fall of man, weren't divine parables, but suppressed records of an ancient colonization? Before the names God, Yahweh, or Jehovah were ever spoken, there were other names inscribed in stone by civilizations that predate the Bible by thousands of years. And those names told a different story. In the oldest languages on Earth, the creators of humanity were never described as gods as we conceive them today. They were described as beings from the sky, the Anunnaki. These weren't metaphors. They didn't come to enlighten. They came to control. And the world built today, the governments, the banks, the empires, the religions, still operates on the architecture they left behind. The Anunnaki were not gods, they were colonizers, and the evidence has been hidden in plain sight. For centuries, ancient libraries lay buried beneath the sands of time. Clay tablets marked with strange symbols locked in the ruins of Mesopotamian cities like Nineveh, and Babylon. To the untrained eye, they looked like simple decorations, scratches in the clay, the art of forgotten hands. But those symbols weren't art. They were language. When the code was finally broken, what emerged was not just economic data or inventory lists, but a complete record of humanity's earliest encounters with power, civilization, and something else. Something not human. The stories etched into these cuneiform tablets mirror the tales found in Genesis: creation from clay, a paradise lost, a forbidden knowledge, a great flood, a tower that reaches toward the heavens. But there was one overwhelming, world-shattering difference. These stories were older, much older, and they made no mention of God. Instead, they spoke of rulers from the sky, powerful beings who came from above, reshaped the earth, governed the early human race, and then vanished. The Sumerians called them Anunnaki, a name that would echo through myth, religion, and forbidden history. In this version of the story, there was no divine plan, no heavenly father, no sin and redemption. There was only dominion. Humanity wasn't created as children of a loving God, but engineered as workers in a colony controlled by outsiders. And once this version of the story surfaced, everything began to unravel. In the ruins of ancient Mesopotamian cities, Nippur, Eridu, Lagash, and the once mighty Nineveh, archaeologists unearthed something unprecedented. Not just broken pottery or royal tombs, but rows of baked clay tablets, preserved beneath the sands for over 5,000 years. What emerged wasn't an isolated relic, but an immense collection. Nearly 200,000 cuneiform tablets, each one inscribed with precise wedge-shaped markings pressed into soft clay, then hardened by fire or sun. At first, these marks were misunderstood, assumed to be meaningless ornaments or decorative script. Many were dismissed, shelved, or even destroyed, their content deemed irrelevant by early Western institutions who couldn't yet comprehend their significance. But when a key inscription carved into a towering cliff was finally deciphered, everything changed. The breakthrough came from the Behistun inscription, an ancient multilingual text carved into limestone in what is now Western Iran. Written in Old Persian, Elamite, and Akkadian, all expressed in cuneiform, it served the same function as the Rosetta Stone, a translation key, a cipher. With that code cracked, the Mesopotamian tablets became readable for the first time in millennia, and what they revealed shook the foundations of archaeology, religion, and human identity. The content ranged from everyday life to cosmic mystery. These weren't just trade records or legal contracts, though there were thousands of those. They included complex mathematical equations, astronomical charts, medicinal recipes, hymns, war reports, and detailed accounts of interactions with non-human entities. Entire civilizations had encoded their beliefs, histories, and cosmic knowledge into clay. And buried within these writings was a narrative older than Genesis, older than the Torah, older than any known scripture. A narrative that told of beings from the sky, descending to earth, organizing human society, appointing rulers, introducing systems of agriculture, mathematics, architecture, and asserting total control over early human life. These were not gods. They had names, ranks, rivalries, and hierarchies. They came from above. And the Sumerians, with no allegory or symbolism, referred to them as Anunnaki, those who came from the heavens to earth. In tablet after tablet, these entities were described not in spiritual terms, but in political ones. Commanders, overseers, engineers, colonizers. And they didn't just rule from the sky. They lived among humans, bred with them, and governed the very systems that modern civilization still operates on today. The archive was not myth. It was administration, a record of domination, a blueprint for control. What had once been dismissed as myth was now revealed to be memory, preserved in stone, waiting to be reawakened. In the book of Genesis, the opening chapters use two distinct names to refer to the divine. One is Yahweh, a sacred name said to have been revealed to Moses long after the events of Eden, the flood, and Babel. The other is Elohim. But there's a mystery hiding in plain sight, because the name Yahweh wasn't even known at the time of the stories it's written into. It appears retroactively, inserted into much older texts, a powerful clue that these stories had been edited or rewritten long after their original versions were passed down. The name Elohim, however, is something else entirely. On the surface, many modern translations present Elohim as a singular god, but the original Hebrew is unambiguous. Elohim is plural. The suffix im in Hebrew is a grammatical marker for masculine plural nouns, and throughout Genesis, this word behaves as a plural in multiple key moments. Let us make man in our image. The man has become like one of us. Let us go down and confuse their language. These are not the words of a singular deity. These are the discussions of a council, a group, a collective of powerful beings deliberating over humanity's creation, limitation, and management. So why has this plural word been consistently translated as singular? Because to read it accurately opens a door to something that institutional religion was never prepared to face. Elohim doesn't mean God, it means gods. In other contexts across the Old Testament, the word Elohim is translated as angels, gods, judges, or even landlords, depending on the agenda of the translator. This elasticity betrays the truth. Elohim is not a name. It's a category. And in the ancient world, that category was well understood. When the word Elohim is restored to its true plural meaning, the book of Genesis changes shape. It ceases to be a monotheistic origin story and becomes a mirror of the Sumerian texts, a record of humanity being shaped, governed, and manipulated by a group of powerful sky beings. In other words, Elohim and Anunnaki are describing the same entities, just in two different languages. The Hebrew Elohim and the Sumerian Anunnaki both refer to those from above, beings of immense authority who came down, altered the human genome, reshaped the earth, and implemented systems of control that still echo today. And suddenly, the contradictions of Genesis begin to make sense. The seemingly erratic behavior of God, blessing humanity one moment and cursing them the next, creating the moment to destroy them, ceases to be theological mystery and begins to look like the conflicting actions of multiple beings, each with their own agenda. The story of Eden becomes an experiment. The flood becomes a reset. Babel becomes a containment breach. And Elohim becomes the plural key that unlocks it all. Among the hundreds of thousands of recovered cuneiform tablets, one stands apart in both mystery and significance: the Sumerian king list. A seemingly dry document, It presents itself as a chronological record of Sumer's ancient dynasties, names, cities, and lengths of reign. At first glance, it reads like any historical succession chart, but as the timeline winds further into the past, the numbers begin to defy all logic. Certain rulers are recorded as having reigned for 28,000 years, 36,000 years, even 43,000 years, with mathematical precision, down to the final month and day. One dynasty, for example, is said to have lasted exactly 24,510 years, 3 months, and 3.5 days, divided between just 23 kings. That's an average reign of more than 1,000 years per king. And this isn't an isolated anomaly. Another line of rulers, said to have governed before the Great Flood, is recorded as having ruled for 241,000 years, distributed among just 8 kings. What makes this even more astonishing is the uniformity of the timekeeping. These reigns are not presented in vague, mythic epochs. They're written in the same Sumerian sexagesimal system that gave the world 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, and 360 degrees in a circle. In other words, the same civilization that gave humanity the foundation for modern mathematics and astronomy, measured these reigns with scientific precision, not metaphor. Some modern interpretations have tried to explain away these timelines as symbolic or poetic. But those explanations collapse under scrutiny, because later in the same Kame list, after the flood, reign lengths returned to familiar human scale figures: 6 years, 18 years, 36 years. All measured with the exact same units as those impossibly long pre-flood reigns. The only reasonable conclusion: the earliest kings were not human. These were not rulers in the traditional sense. They were either the Anunnaki themselves or genetically enhanced hybrids with lifespans that vastly exceeded those of natural Homo sapiens. This transition from immortal or semi-immortal monarchs to more human rulers marks a shift in Earth's administration. A shift from direct control by the sky beings to governance by their offspring or proxies. And at the heart of this hybrid dynasty stands one figure above all others: Gilgamesh. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest surviving works of literature, describes him as 2/3 divine and 1/3 human, a genetic blend that echoes precisely the idea of cross-species hybridization. His name appears on the Sumerian king list, grounding myth into recorded history. Gilgamesh was not just a king, he was a prototype, a bridge between two species, a ruler designed to inherit the earth, but still answer to those from the sky. The Tower of Babel is often remembered as a tale of pride and punishment, a human attempt to reach the heavens only to be struck down by divine wrath. But that's the later version, the sanitized one. Buried in much older Mesopotamian accounts, the story looks entirely different. It wasn't about arrogance, it wasn't about punishment, it was about technology, and the sudden termination of a project that threatened to reopen Earth's connection to the stars. In the Sumerian version of the story, Babel is not described as a mere tower, but as a functioning facility, a cosmic hub staffed by 50 specialized technicians. Their objective was highly specific: to prepare 300 observers for deployment to their stations in the sky. These observers were not symbolic angels or priests. They were personnel, technicians, astronomers, watchers. Assigned to orbiting platforms or planetary outposts, their mission was part of a global infrastructure, linking Earth to what the ancient texts describe as the celestial realms. The structure at Babel wasn't designed to reach heaven metaphorically. It was a literal launch platform, a gateway meant to reconnect Earth with off-world stations that had once been active during the golden era of the Anunnaki presence. Even the architecture itself supports this theory. Ziggurats, the stepped pyramid structures built throughout Mesopotamia, were modeled after the earlier Babel structure. Their name in Akkadian, Etememanki, translates as Temple of the Foundation of Heaven and Earth, not a house of worship, a junction point, a transit node. In parallel, the Genesis account cryptically references the danger of humanity becoming like one of us, a statement that makes little sense in a singular theological framework, but aligns perfectly with the idea of a collective of beings restricting access to advanced technology and knowledge. The biblical version tells of a confusion of tongues, an act that scattered humanity and ended the project. But what if the confusion wasn't just linguistic? What if the destruction of Babel was a shutdown of the launch system, a sabotage of Earth's extraterrestrial uplink, and a forced memory wipe, designed to erase any remaining knowledge of how to reopen that gateway? The Mesopotamian sources do not depict Babel as a sin against heaven. They describe it as a moment of contact, a return to a celestial network, a moment that was interrupted. This paints Babel not as a tower of arrogance, but as an act of rebellion. A human-assisted attempt to reconnect with the stars, and someone, or something, made sure it failed. Of the launch system, a sabotage of Earth's extraterrestrial uplink, and a forced memory wipe, designed to erase any remaining knowledge of how to reopen that gateway. The Mesopotamian sources do not depict Babel as a sin against heaven. They describe it as a moment of contact, a return to a celestial network, a moment that was interrupted. This paints Babel not as a tower of arrogance, but as an act of rebellion. A human-assisted attempt to reconnect with the stars, and someone, or something, made sure it failed. The ancient Sumerian tablets don't speak in riddles when it comes to human origins. They make no mention of divine breath or sacred miracles. Instead, they describe a technical process, a deliberate genetic intervention. According to the Atrahasis epic, an early Sumerian creation narrative, there was a time when the Anunnaki themselves were forced to labor under harsh conditions, mining resources deep within the earth. These were the Igigi, the junior workers of the Sky People, who eventually rebelled against their overlords. Faced with the threat of mutiny, the ruling Anunnaki devised an alternative: create a substitute species, a being strong enough to carry out the physical burdens of labor, yet limited enough to remain compliant. The solution was found in the genetic material of a local primate species, possibly Homo erectus or an earlier hominin. Using advanced knowledge of biology and reproductive science, the Anunnaki are described as having combined their own essence, what we would today call DNA, with that of the native species, resulting in something new, Homo sapiens. Not a random product of evolution, not the accidental outcome of millions of years, but a deliberate hybrid, a programmable worker class. This is why so many of the earliest myths describe human beings as being made from clay, a symbolic term used across cultures to reference the manipulation of base material, the reshaping of life through the hands of the gods. And it didn't stop there. This hybrid species needed rulers, figures who could interface with both the colonizers and the workforce. Enter the hybrids, beings like Gilgamesh, Etana, part sky being, part human. These rulers weren't just political figures. They were genetic intermediaries designed to govern humanity while remaining loyal to the Anunnaki elite. The clearest proof of this may still lie buried beneath the sands. In 1927, archaeologists uncovered the royal tomb of Queen Puabi, a powerful Sumerian matriarch from the city of Ur. Her skeletal remains were found remarkably well preserved, buried with jewels, golden headdresses, and attendants, suggesting a status beyond that of normal royalty. Yet despite the availability of her remains and the surge in genetic sequencing technology, there has been no official effort to extract or analyze her DNA. The same silence surrounds other burial sites in Mesopotamia, linked to the earliest hybrid rulers. In 2003, during the invasion of Iraq, reports surfaced that coalition forces had secured a subterranean structure believed to be the tomb of Gilgamesh himself. According to leaked information, the site was identified, accessed, and immediately sealed off under military control. No further excavation, no public data, no DNA testing. Why? Because if these royal bodies were found to contain non-human genetic markers, it would validate the core claim of the ancient texts, that humanity is not alone, and never has been. We are not the first intelligent species to govern this planet. We were manufactured to serve the ones who were. The Anunnaki operated like any advanced colonial force. In the beginning, their presence was direct and visible. They issued commands, oversaw labor, conducted genetic experiments, reigned through fear and divine authority. Their monuments pierced the sky. Their servants walked among kings. But complete control doesn't require eternal presence. It only requires a system that runs on its own, and so they built one, layer by layer. Education designed not to awaken, but to instruct obedience. Law, framed not around justice but around hierarchy and punishment. Currency, not as a tool for fair exchange, but as a mechanism for debt, dependency, and value manipulation. Even time itself, measured by a system the Sumerians inherited directly from their sky rulers, was engineered as a rigid structure that governed labor cycles and social order. The sexagesimal system of 60-based counting, 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, 360 degrees in a circle, wasn't a mathematical coincidence. It was an imported protocol, one still in use today, a relic of an interstellar logic embedded into human civilization like code. Once this machine of control was running, self-policing, self-replicating, the Anunnaki no longer needed to remain in visible command. They could withdraw and allow the system to enforce their agenda. The workers became overseers, the hybrids became kings, the rituals of obedience became traditions, religions, institutions. And so humanity inherited a colony disguised as a civilization. This hidden empire stretched beyond stone temples and ziggurats. Its architecture became legal systems, economic frameworks, national borders, and religious dogma. And the most insidious part? The belief that these systems are our own, that humanity invented hierarchy, that humans created slavery, that money and time are organic developments of society. But none of it is natural. It was taught, imposed, programmed. Even today, traces of that original command structure remain, not in ancient temples, but in palaces, boardrooms, and legislative chambers. The question must be asked, are the rulers of today acting as stewards of their own authority, or as proxies for something far older? Could those who control the modern world, through banking, policy, war, and culture, be the ideological descendants of the very colonizers who once ruled from the stars? Because if the system was never dismantled, then the empire never truly fell. It simply went invisible. The ancient Mesopotamian texts, especially the Enuma Elish and the Atrahasis epic, hint at a fracture among the Anunnaki elite. Two opposing forces emerge from these records, one obsessed with obedience and population control, the other inclined toward guidance, evolution, and protection. One side viewed humanity as a biological tool, a labor force designed to mine, serve, obey, and never question. The other saw potential in the new hybrid species, a spark of awareness that, if nurtured, could grow into something greater. This conflict played out not just in hidden debates or secret laboratories, but in global-scale cataclysms that were later mythologized as acts of God. The flood, for example, described in both Genesis and the Epic of Gilgamesh, is not portrayed in the original Sumerian texts as divine justice. It is a strategic decision, an intentional reset designed to wipe out the human population, erasing a failed or disobedient experiment. In the Atrahasis, it is Enlil, the figurehead of the controlling faction, who demands humanity's annihilation, claiming they had become too numerous, too noisy, too independent. But Enki, the scientist and engineer responsible for humanity's genetic design, secretly opposes this plan. He breaks protocol. He chooses a family. He delivers the blueprints for survival. Atrahasis, Utnapishtim, Zeusudra, Noah, different names across civilizations, all pointing to the same escape pod from extinction. And the flood was only the beginning. The Sumerian myths describe repeated attempts by the controlling faction to sabotage human development. There are accounts of limiting lifespans, reducing the human ability to reproduce, and perhaps most intriguingly, neurological interference meant to restrict cognitive function. In one passage, the sky beings declare, "Let us confuse their language, so they will not understand one another." But the deeper implication is not just linguistic. It suggests an assault on communication itself, a dampening of mental clarity, a restriction of perceptual bandwidth, a downgrade. If this is true, then the very structure of the human brain may bear the fingerprints of an ancient war. Not one fought with armies, but with genetic codes, electromagnetic fields, and memory suppression. And yet, there are still signs that Enki's agenda never ended. From time to time, bursts of forbidden knowledge, unexplained leaps in civilization, and spiritual awakenings have emerged across cultures, perhaps seeded by the same force that once chose to elevate humanity, instead of erasing it. The ancient temples, the mystical rituals, the recurring myth of the knowledge bringer, or the wise serpent, these may all be echoes of an ongoing resistance, a secret movement among the stars, to awaken what had once been caged. If humanity is the result of a war between sky factions, share this video and spread the buried truth. Let others see the history written in shadow. All around the planet, ancient myths echo the same pattern. Beings who descended from the sky, brought knowledge, and reshaped human life. In southern Africa, the Zulu speak of the Nomo, star beings who came from Sirius, and taught the ancestors to plant crops, build homes, and measure the skies. In ancient Mesopotamia, the Apkallu were said to emerge from the waters in the form of radiant, half-human sages, bringing science, astronomy, writing, and law to a fledgling civilization. In Mesoamerica, the Maya revered Kukulkan, a feathered serpent who arrived from the heavens, shared mathematics and timekeeping, and then promised to return. In Aboriginal Australia, there are the Wandjina, white-skinned sky beings with elongated heads, often drawn without mouths, depicted for tens of thousands of years in remote rock shelters, always looking down from above. Across cultures, across continents, the message is consistent. Humanity did not evolve in isolation. It was assisted, directed, overseen, and that oversight may never have ended. In modern times, reports of bright, silent craft, triangular ships, circular discs, and glowing orbs continue to flood in, seen by civilians, pilots, and military alike. Witnesses describe tall, pale humanoids, often emotionless, often accompanied by experiments, missing time, or a sensation of mental paralysis. Others speak of hybrid programs where reproductive material is harvested, modified, and implanted into artificial wombs. At first glance, these accounts seem disconnected. Science fiction stories, hallucinations, or classified military exercises. But when placed side by side with the ancient texts, a disturbing continuity emerges. The Watchers of Babel, the Engineers of Eden, the Gods of Uruk, they all performed the same types of interventions described in today's abduction reports. Genetic manipulation, implantation, memory erasure, telepathic control. The pattern is not new, it's recurring. And if the original project on Earth was designed to create and monitor a controlled population, then these ongoing encounters may not be isolated incidents. They may be checkups, surveillance, continuation. A planetary experiment, still running in the shadows, still managed by those who began it thousands of years ago, or by those who inherited their role. Which raises an even more unnerving possibility. if humanity was the product of ancient engineering? What stage of the experiment are we in now? Hidden beneath the surface of myth, obscured by tradition and dogma, lies another kind of knowledge, one not written in stone or carved into tablets, but encoded in rituals, passed in silence, and practiced in secret. While the colonizers built systems to control the body, many ancient cultures preserved methods to liberate the mind. These were not primitive beliefs or superstitions, they were tools, technologies, activation protocols. From the high temples of the Mediterranean to the dense jungles of the Americas, from the deserts of Africa to the mountaintops of Asia, human beings engaged in ceremonies of transformation. They involved bitter brews, sacred smokes, deep breathwork, rhythmic motion, extended silence, and symbolic death and rebirth journeys. Participants emerged from these rites altered, often reporting visions of otherworldly places, encounters with luminous beings, and revelations that transcended language. These experiences were not entertainment. They were encoded awakenings, a way to disengage from the neural restrictions imposed by earlier manipulation. A way to reactivate dormant pathways in the brain, restoring perception, expanding awareness, and igniting buried memory. In remote regions, elders still speak of entering a space between worlds, guided by chants, patterns, and ceremonial tools designed to open what modern language fails to describe, a gateway within. And across civilizations, the result is uncannily consistent. A sudden sense of ancient familiarity, a feeling of reconnecting with something that was always inside, yet hidden. This raises a provocative question. Were these rituals intentionally preserved as counter-programming? A last act of defiance by those who refused to bow to the systems of control? A silent resistance passed down by those who remembered what humans were before the downgrade? Because if the Anunnaki imposed limits on cognition, if they engineered a species designed to serve, then these methods, subtle, sacred, secret, may represent a map back to full awareness. And perhaps that's why they were so aggressively suppressed. Modern society tells us these ancient practices are outdated, dangerous, or irrational. But what if they're not? What if they were the only remaining technologies capable of breaking the code? Maybe humanity was programmed, but programming can be rewritten. And the rituals buried in ancestral memory may hold the key. Across the layers of myth, scripture, and buried stone tablets, one pattern remains consistent. Humanity was never the result of a purely terrestrial process. The genetic record, the myths of sudden emergence, the fusion of animal instinct with cosmic awareness, all point to a hybrid origin, part earthling, part something else. We were created with intent, but not born free. Our earliest chapters tell of service, obedience, and limitation. A species engineered to labor, governed by dynasties that were never fully human. And then, abandonment. The gods withdrew. The watchers receded. But not without leaving behind something more than scars. Hidden in the architecture of our languages, our bodies, our memories, is a blueprint, a backdoor out of the control system. The flood did not erase us. The neurological downgrade did not silence us forever, and the rituals of awakening did not vanish. They went underground, preserved in chants, in ceremonies, in whispers passed down across millennia. So, what if humanity was never meant to remain enslaved? What if the very beings who created us could not agree on what we should become? What if some wanted us to rise? The key to our future does not lie in new machines or distant planets. It lies in the ancient past, in decoding the stories, unlocking the rituals, and reclaiming a destiny that was never meant to be stolen. Because if we are part Anunnaki, then we are not just workers. We are the inheritors of two worlds, and the moment we remember that, everything changes.